Welcome back to the channel. My name is Usman. Today I'm going to be doing a review on a set of new lenses from a company called Sirui. Sirui has been producing a lot of niche and interesting manual focus lenses for photographers, but more recently they've started shifting over to cinematographers and videographers, producing anamorphic lenses and Cine lenses. And their latest edition, the Nightwalker series, these lenses are T1.2 lenses, which means that they've got an extremely wide aperture. And the beauty of this set is that all three lenses are very similar in size and dimensions, making them ideal for run and gun. If you've got like a gimbal setup, then you can very quickly change the lenses without having to rebalance, making them extremely useful. So the focal lengths are a 24mm T1.2, 35mm T1.2 and a 55mm T1.2. And I thought that would come into Leeds. We're here at the docks in Leeds. I thought we'd take a few clips with these lenses, see what they're all about, and see what the performance is like. So yeah, let's take a few clips and see what these lenses are all about. So the first thing I want to talk about are my initial impressions and the build quality of the lenses. So construction-wise, these are solid metals, really well made. I mean, these are budget lenses, about £300-400 each, but still, construction is fantastic. The aperture ring is nice and smooth, and the focus ring has a really long throw, meaning that you can be quite precise when you're trying to find a subject. The only negative point that I have with the focus ring is that it's a little bit too loose, like there's no resistance on the focus ring, and I would have preferred it to have a little bit more resistance, like some of the other Sirui lenses that I've used. When I spoke to Sirui about it, they said that they received feedback, and a lot of customers were saying that their lenses have too much resistance, but I think this is going too far in the other direction. Nonetheless, still long focus throw, so you can be precise with focusing. Now, despite the fact that these are T1.2 lenses and 24mm, you're not going to get that field of view because it's not a full frame lens. These are designed for APS-C size sensors or Super 35mm sensors, Super 35 sensors, and because of that, the 24 T1.2 is kind of like a 36mm T1.8, the 35 is like a 52mm T1.8, and the 55 is a 82mm T1.8. So yes, you are going to get that shallow depth of field, especially with the 55mm, but it's not going to have that wider field of view, which some of you may like with the larger sensors. But still, it is a T1.2 lens, not an f1.2 lens, meaning that when you're shooting at 1.2 on this lens, the exposure values with all three lenses are going to be exactly the same. So you've got that consistency. And like I said, because the dimensions, the weight and the size are very similar, I can take this lens off, put this lens on without having to balance things again and just carry on shooting. So that is one of the major benefits of this series of lenses. You can just hop between lenses, change the focal length, and the aperture range exactly the same, focus range exactly the same, and that makes this a really powerful system if you're shooting with an APS-C size sensor. Now, despite the fact that these lenses were designed for Super 35 sensors, you can actually shoot these lenses with a wider field of view because they cover more than a Super 35 sensor. Now, if you crop down to about 1.2 times on a 55mm or around 1.3 times, 1.3 seems about safe, you can actually shoot with a wider field of view with these lenses. One of the things I noticed about all three lenses is how close you can get to your subject. The minimum focus distance is really good on all three lenses, meaning that you can have more flexibility when you need to step in a little bit closer to your subject. Now, if you're thinking about shooting in backlit scenarios, then these lenses might not be the best option. And the reason for that is because they do demonstrate a significant loss in contrast and lens flares that obstruct a large portion of the frame. With a 35mm lens, these lens flares take up an even larger portion of the frame, and moving on to the 55mm lens, these lens flares take up pretty much the whole scene. So potentially you could use this in a creative way. However, if you're not planning on using this in a creative sense, then this might become a problem. Having said that, the bokeh from these lenses is actually quite beautiful. The rendering is smooth, the bokeh balls don't have any onioning or unsightly artifacts, and aside from the cat's eye looking bokeh on the edges of the frame, which is quite normal to be fair, the overall rendering is smooth and really pleasing to look at. focus breathing has been controlled extremely well in all three lenses. So when you focus from one subject to another, you're not going to see major changes in the size of the subject. Of course, if you are focusing from one side to the other, then you may notice some changes, but overall, the focus breathing on all three lenses has been controlled extremely well. So if you are going to be racking focus between one subject to another, you're not going to see any major changes in the size of the frame. Now, when you're shooting wide open with these lenses, the biggest problem is not the softness in the image, but the chromatic aberrations. The chromatic aberrations can be really distracting. However, if you stop down to T2, then many of those chromatic aberrations will disappear. And this is similar performance across the board with all three lenses. T1.2, you're going to notice quite a lot of chromatic aberrations. However, as you stop down to T2, many of those chromatic aberrations will disappear and you'll get a cleaner looking image. Now, of course, the T1.2 aperture is also the biggest benefit of this series of lenses, because with that super wide aperture, you can shoot in those lower light scenarios, in those darker environments without needing to bump up the ISO so high, so you're going to get a cleaner looking result. Additionally, the minimum focus distance of this series of lenses means that I can get really close to the subject if I want to, so I have that flexibility. I can shoot wider and get more in the frame if I want to, or I can isolate the subject and get really close if I need to as well. So, final thoughts and conclusions on the Nightwalker series of lenses from Sirui, and honestly, I'm quite impressed. I'm impressed because these are budget lenses that don't perform like budget lenses. I mean, they're like, what, 300, 400 pounds each? So for around £1,000, you can buy a set of incredibly high performing Cine lenses. I mean, construction is brilliant. They've got a super wide aperture T1.2, so you don't need to bump up the ISO too high when you're shooting in those lower light scenarios. Focus ring, you've got a massive focus throw. They're incredibly consistent. The bokeh, the sharpness, the colors across the board. I mean, you can change lenses and the look and feel is very, very similar. I mean, sure, they're not the sharpest lenses when you're shooting wide open, but it is a T1.2 lens, and as soon as you stop down to around T1.8 or T2, it sharpens up really well. So on that basis, I don't have any complaints in regards to performance. The only issue I think some of you may come across is the fact that when you're shooting with in backlit scenarios, when there's a lot of flaring, then you are going to lose some contrast. So some of you may not like that, but some of you could use that in a creative way. I mean, I know I kind of like the look of it occasionally, not always, but sometimes, you can use it in a creative way. The only major negative, which is not really a major negative, is the focus ring. I mean, it's really loose, and that's the only downside to this lens. But aside from that, I'm so impressed with these lenses. Yes, they're designed for Super 35 sensors, so they're APS-C lenses, but as I've shown in the video, you can shoot with a crop of 1.2 on the Sony a7R5. When you're shooting at 4K 60, it crops the sensor by 1.2 times, and this lens, or all three lenses, will still cover the sensor comfortably. So it's not necessarily just designed for APS-C lenses, although Sirui may not recommend that you shoot with sensors that are larger than Super 35, but you can if you want to. So on that basis, these are incredibly flexible lenses. You've got the opportunity to shoot them with potentially larger sensors, meaning that the focal length and the equivalents are going to be slightly different, but still you've got those options there, and they're not that expensive. So yeah, I think this is probably some of the best budget Cine lenses on the market right now, and I highly recommend them. So yeah, that was the video review of the Sirui Nightwalker series. If you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe, share this video, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Thank you.